VTubers shouldn't just be treated as like a novelty of like, oh, it's like a virtual avatar. The fun trend that is going around is you chuck an iPad on a Segway and you drive it around the event. And that's how the VTuber can kind of roam the halls of the event and interact with the attendees. But, you know, VTubers present this opportunity to have a guest on, and you can pay them a higher appearance fee, which, you know, the VTuber would love. And what they bring with them is a very dedicated audience with a very dedicated reach.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Tractus Events YouTube channel. My name's Elias Prunen, and you may have noticed that I look a little bit different today. Well, don't be too surprised. This is my VTuber avatar that I'm going with, and I am thrilled to introduce a guest today. Goes by the name Ducky online. Andrew is a journalist. He's been a journalist for 7 years with a focus on video games and esports. He's written for publications like Cherdo, where he was previously the managing editor, Esports, and the West Australian. Now Ducky is a freelance contributor to Cherdo and VTuber News Drop with a focus on virtual influencers and the VTubing realm. Thank you for joining me, man.
Oh, thank you for having me on, Lass. I really, really appreciate it. And yeah, that intro is pretty much rock solid as to who I am in the background. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And you're a fellow member of the Commonwealth.
I am indeed a fellow member of the Commonwealth down here, down under. You know,
where everything's upside down, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It's funny because, you know, you mentioned that. I'm like, oh yeah, Canada's in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, we are. It's that little group of countries, and we don't actually know what the Commonwealth is anymore, but we're part of it.
Yeah. Well, my mom's Canadian as well, so like, you know, that kind of like is where I get it from as well. So
oh, that's cool. That's awesome. So for those that tune into my videos on a regular basis, you're probably here for event-related, virtual event, hybrid event-related production stuff. Today's topic is going to be a little bit different. We're going to talk about VTubers and what the heck this is and what this means for companies and brands going forward. If you missed my last video, where it was the 2024 event predictions video, I talked quite a bit at the end about the VTuber revolution that is happening, but I don't want you to just take my word for it. I wanted to introduce somebody that is an expert in the VTubing realm, and that's why Ducky is here today. So why don't we start off with the easiest question of all time, right? What the heck is a VTuber? Like, people who are tuning in might have seen it around the edges. They might have seen their kids like looking at TikTok and seeing these anime characters bouncing around. In your words, what is a VTuber?
It's funny that you say this is the easiest cab off the rank to get started with. And, you know, VTubing is now in its 7th year of existence and people still can't decide on a definition and what it actually is. But let's get to the thick of it, I guess. So VTubing, the term it's a shortened term. The full term means virtual YouTuber. And in that is kind of the description of what VTubing is. It is people using virtual avatars akin to what you would maybe create in a video game to YouTube or create content online. The avatars are typically hand-drawn. My one is hand-drawn in a 2D realm. Your one is more rigged in like a 3D realm. But they are both kind of part of the same medium is what I like to call it. VTubing is not just like it is like a community, but it's a community in the way that there are people using it as a medium. And it's no different to a medium than, say, the vlogging medium, where you pick up a camera and you go and record your events and your life story like a David Dobrik, or you go and you run events and webinars and all those kinds of things where you stick a camera up on a computer in a conference room, or you actually are physically present at an event, and it's being recorded in that kind of format. It's the same way that VTubing is a medium to kind of convey that communication, just with these avatars, which, you know, might be humanoid. Some are not humanoid, but they are kind of the depiction of the person behind them in one way or another.
Now, do you find that a lot of times people, when they make a VTuber avatar, they will make it based on themselves? Like, obviously mine is, but am I the exception to the norm? Like, do people make them based on themselves, or do they explore different versions of themselves? Like, what's kind of the norm when it comes to making a VTuber avatar?
The norm is that there is no norm. The norm is that the realm of VTubing and the expression that is created to you by literally having a blank canvas to draw and then making whatever the hell you want that's basically VTubing as a whole. And so it's split between like the people who have representations of themselves, like myself. My model is clothes that are in my wardrobe and have sentimental value to me. The only difference between what I look like in real life and what my VTuber model looks like is in real life, I don't have white hair. That's the only difference. Also in real life, I have tattoos. My model doesn't have tattoos, but that's beside the point. But there are similarly so many other people who would make models that they couldn't even fathom looking like themselves. They would be half human, half animal. They would be full animal. They would be mythical creatures. And all of those I find are, while they may not be physical representations of a person, they definitely align with how someone wants to present themselves, whether that be it's a character that they play in a video game, whether it's something that, they've whipped up as an original character for a tabletop RPG game. So even though that it may not physically represent themselves and like it be a splitting mirror if they look in a mirror, it is still the person. It is still themselves.
Right. Okay. So it is a reflection of themselves, maybe not a direct physical reflection, but it represents them in spirit. Yeah. Would that be?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Because it struck me because I've been thinking about VTubers and virtual influencers and that for a while. And I remember back in 2020, December 2020, I attended a furry convention online. This was like the darkest days of the pandemic, right?
Mm.
And it was really cool to see people not just the live streams where people could be themselves, but also to see everybody take on the different avatar roles in the VR chat world that I was in. And I mean, that, taking on avatars in a virtual space is nothing new. Like we've been able to do that in Second Life really since
2002.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Second Life was, I think, 2002. So
It was
the kind of
God,
yeah,
I feel old.
I'm very sorry to bring that up. But yeah, no, it is no different to a representation of a character that we've used in Second Life or Gaia Online, or even like Hubbo, if you remember that. Like, there are all these kinds of virtual spaces that people have interacted in for decades now online. And there are even more anonymized spaces where people have interacted in online, whether that be through just typical web forms, or even like video games, like your MMORPG games like World of Warcraft, where you can create a character. Obviously, there are parameters that you have to follow and a set amount of, I guess, customizable elements the game gives you, but you're still able to make a character that is uniquely you. And VTubing is just a broader extension of that and a more personal extension of that, because there is an unlimited amount of ways that you can design a character when you start is with a blank canvas, and you can draw basically whatever you want and model it up the way that you want it to be.
Right. So we've been talking a lot about the personal realm. Let's move into the business realm. So something I've noticed, and I've been absolutely loving what Opera GX has been doing with Aura. You've been following Aura GX, right?
Yes.
And just watching that whole personality develop, which led me down the rabbit hole of the corporate VTubers and the corporate VTuber avatars. Like MSI has one, Opera GX has one. I mean, Kellogg's tried to debut a VTuber of Tony the Tiger.
Tony the Tiger, that's the iconic one.
Yeah, it's a super iconic one, like super old. He only did one stream, but they still did something.
Yeah.
And so on the personal level, VTubers make a lot of sense. It can be an extension of yourself, all this other, like it's an extension of yourself. You can express yourself, you can do content creation. But what about on the business side, on the more corporate side? Is VTubing limited to just, say, your traditional tech companies, or is this something that every company should be taking a look at and taking a serious look at?
I think there's an argument for both sides. So brand VTubers, you've listed off a couple, a bit more name value, Crunchyroll, the US-based anime publisher slash licensing company, has had a VTuber called Hime, who is probably the most recognizable in the VTuber community because they interact very regularly with your traditional VTuber. But Netflix has had a VTuber in Japan. AirAsia has a VTubing company where they have like VTubers tied to their brand. So, off the top of that, I've listed streaming services, but I've also listed an airline, right? So there is a plethora of opportunities for companies of different broad scope to take advantage of VTubers. And so the way that I see it is there's two ways of doing it. The one is it's kind of like a evolution of the way that we've seen social media develop, especially in the corporate space in the last 3 to 5 years, where you've seen brand accounts, especially on Twitter, become a little bit more meme focused, a little bit more personable, less like strictly like, hey, here's a new product that we're doing, and more, we are now creating content and bringing eyes to our brand through whether it be absurd tweets or whether it be just commentary on current events. And VTubers can act and in a very similar way, where you can have a brand VTuber that delivers the same kind of promotional opportunity and I guess interest and topicalness to current events that previously companies through their communications haven't tapped into, where they've kept it pretty high and dry of here's the new products, here's the events that we've attended, here's all the great work that we're doing. And so it's more of an evolution of how social media has come along, and VTubers can slip quite nicely into that. The flip side of it is that is obviously a brand risk. And so when companies look at investigating their own VTubers, or even mascots for that matter, because, the kind of predecessor to VTubers and making it a moving model is just having a company mascot. And company mascots have been around for decades. Like they've been around since, the early 20th century. We're talking about here, like over a century. And so this is kind of an evolution of that. But when you start bringing those mascots to life, that's where you can start running into a little bit of like a brand risk if you don't adopt the VTuber kind of model with the right parameters in place and with the right goals in place. So if you have an authentic uptake of the VTuber model, it can literally be a catapult of the growth of relatable social media that we have seen from corporations in the last 3 to 5 years. But the online community is also very quick to dismiss any company that kind of jumps on board for the hype. So it is kind of pertinent to do your research.
So then what's the difference and distinction between, say, a mascot and a VTuber? Because I could see a lot of people saying that sounds like the same thing.
Yeah, so they can be the same thing. That's the thing is, a mascot, you can dress up and have at events in real life as well, right? And usually they're just dressing around in a bobble suit. Like the way that I'm envisioning it is like a sports mascot on the sideline, right?
Right.
And those are when you have a corporate activation at an event. That's typically also what mascots are like. But the VTubers can give your brand personality. They can give your company personality. They can be a spokesperson like your COO is a spokesperson. They can tap into a different audience because they are made for a different audience. They are more relatable to a younger audience, especially those who are online on the platforms like TikTok that you mentioned, but also Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Those are the kinds of mediums that VTubing really penetrates into. And so while a mascot can just be an inanimate object or something that is like just there as a little bit of eye candy, a VTuber can also bring a bit of personality to your brand, a bit of relatability to your brand, and it can also be a way of storytelling or getting the message out in that kind of way. It's a bit more of a dynamic communication model.
Interesting. As you were talking about differences between the mascots and the VTubers and just that building that the stories around them and the communities around them, I just thought about all the sports teams, especially like NHL teams that have mascots that I think, wow, if they wanted to reach a younger demographic, these characters that they have are ripe for creating a VTuber avatar, wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly. Like you can think of any sports mascot. Like you bring up the NHL. Can you imagine if like Gritty was a VTuber, right? So you've got Gritty out on the ice, right?
That's
And
exactly who I was thinking of. That's exactly who I was
exactly.
thinking of.
So, you've got Gritty out on the ice, and sometimes they give the person in the mascot suit like the microphone to have a bit of fun with it. But you could build an entire social media brand around it that is tied to your company, that brings in a different, more dynamic audience, in the same way that you've seen. And I guess Wendy's was the fast food company that kind of revolutionized it, but companies start using social media to just tweet whatever. And if you're in the brand and marketing space, you probably would have seen, I guess this is because this is quite popular and it is a crossover, with the Grimace shake and the Grimace birthday promotion that McDonald's recently ran. That went absolutely viral on TikTok. And that also reached into the VTuber realm, where you had VTubers making memes and commentary about it. And you look at the engagement that McDonald's had across the 2 weeks that the promotion was live, and it is, 5-10-fold compared to most of their other social media engagements. People were actively going out and buying the product. And while McDonald's is a massive conglomerate, and you could be just like a small startup company and thinking, well, what does a VTuber have for me? Is I've interviewed game developers who have developed a VTuber to be, or like brought on a VTuber to be the face of the brand. They will do the dev updates. They will stream their game and invite people on for collabs. They will run tournaments of their game, and the VTuber will kind of be the face of it all. And a game developer is a very native application, but there's also applications like Bay Area Rapid Transit, where, the BART system in San Francisco, they have, like, they don't have a VTuber model yet, but they have anime mascots, and they've spoken and very openly about VTubers, and they attend anime conventions, all to promote public transport in a demographic that is really, really keen on public transport and accessibility of transport. So it goes to show that, you can build these relatable avatars and bring them to life, no matter the kind of context of your company, no matter the kind of context of your event.
So that leads me to my next big question is, I'm a company, I'm thinking about getting into, maybe making a VTuber avatar. I'm thinking that this would be a really cool way to reach a younger demographic, but I don't want to be the company that flops. I don't want to be just written off. I don't want to be the cringe one. What do I need to keep in mind when I'm creating my VTuber avatar? What do I need to keep in mind when I'm engaging with the VTuber community?
Well, the answer here is not simple, because if you're going to say that you're going to be the cringe one, well, the good thing is that there have been plenty of companies who have stumbled before you. A lot of the VTuber activations that we saw across 2020 and 2021, from big companies who saw an opportunity, especially in Japan, and kind of East Asia markets. So Japan, South Korea, and China are the kind of three markets I'm highlighting there. There was a massive uptick of VTubers, but they didn't last very long. They kind of came off as inauthentic, and that kind of, there's no like easy way to describe what an inauthentic VTuber is, but you do kind of need some knowledge of the online space and the specific online spaces that VTubers interact in, if you want to have traditional success in VTubing. However, I don't think that is necessarily the only way to have success. I don't think that, you need to appeal to the VTuber community for a brand mascot or a brand VTuber to have success. You just need to know your existing audience, and then you need to know the audience that you want to tap into. And whether that demographic lines up with the VTuber demographic would ultimately decide whether a VTuber is a good thing to pursue or not. A VTuber is not like a VTuber model, or this kind of interactive level of social media is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It can be tailored to specific companies, but what it is tailored to is specific marketing strategies and specific communication strategies. So if you're a brand and you're thinking whether a VTuber is right for me, you need to ask yourself, what are the demographics you're targeting? What are the main platforms that you're using to target these demographics? What is your existing profile? And what are you kind of bringing to the table that, a VTuber can actually spread the message about, or has some sort of relatable marketing capacity? VTubers shouldn't just be treated as like a novelty of like, oh, it's like a virtual avatar. A well-designed corporate VTuber like the Opera GX VTuber, like Aura, or like Hime for Crunchyroll, have specific purposes targeting a specific demographic, and they they align it with their broader communication strategy. So that's kind of what you need to consider before just jumping in feet first. You are muted, by the way, so I cannot hear you.
So you need to be intentional about your use of VTubers, then, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Like, you have to be, like in any kind of marketing strategy, you don't go, when TikTok was the uptake, right? You had companies who were like dabbling in TikTok, but they weren't engaging with the culture. And, you know, you have to those were the ones who flopped, whereas the ones who found their demographic and found a way to market to that demographic effectively found success. And you have to be intentional about laying it out as a part of a marketing plan, as part of a communications plan, beyond just, oh, this is what the kids are into. You kind of need to tie all of the pieces together. And then, only then, will you have a better chance of succeeding. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a different way to tap into an audience. And if it's an audience that you're interested in tapping into and engaging, it is definitely the way of the future.
Right. It feels like a very progressive move to go with a VTuber avatar. And it feels like there is a bit of a generational split where you will reach a demographic that is under a certain age if you have a VTuber avatar, and you have to be intentional about including that in your brand.
Now, I wouldn't say it's under a certain age. I would say it's of a certain user. So the VTubing community, what is typically associated with people in the 15 to 34, like, kind of age bracket, right? That's what, like, internally the VTubers think the engagement base is. That's what externally people think is. People maybe externally think it's more closer to 15 to 24. But the reality of the situation is VTubers are a broadly appealing medium. The kind of virtual avatar and mascot thing has been a thing for decades in East Asia, China, South Korea, and Japan. And, you know, you go around any of those countries and they're everywhere. And they're engaged with by people not just in their 30s, but in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, right? They are synonymous over there. And maybe there is a little bit of a cultural divide. That is why the pickup in kind of the more European or North American businesses is going to be a little bit different. But the demographic of the VTuber community is more than just your 15 to 34-year-old male. There is the 15 to 34-year-old woman who is like, that is an entirely different demographic that you can tap into with VTubers. There is an older demographic, like most of the people who do VTubing as a full-time gig and earning, you know, thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a month. They are, you know, at their youngest kind of in their mid-20s. And a lot of the more successful ones are in their 30s and up. I know VTubers who are in their 40s, right? So, you know, it's not just a younger demographic, but it is a specific demographic that is more engaged online, that is engaged in certain subcultures. And you kind of need to do your research on whether those subcultures are something that your brand will work alongside.
Got it. That makes sense. So let's bring this back to events. I want to bring it back to events on two angles. And one is on the VTuber angle, because I've seen a little bit of VTuber presence at a couple of conferences. Like, I think there was at TwitchCon, Buff Pup was there doing and they had a kind of like a virtual booth. You could meet and greet them and have photos taken. So how important is it for VTubers to go to in person, and well, how important is it for VTubers to go to in-person events and either be there physically or come in via a virtual presence?
Well, that's the fun thing is, like, with VTubers and to event organizers who are listening, who are like, should I get an event to guest? Or should I get a guest to come to my next event? Is VTubers can attend virtually. And I know that getting people to physically attend events as a guest is expensive. You know, if they're not in your city, you have to fly them out and you have to give them accommodation. And then there's also obviously like the handler resources and all that kind of stuff. And while VTubers still need handlers on the ground for like tech reasons, or sometimes the fun trend that is going around is you chuck an iPad on a Segway and you drive it around the event. And that's how the VTuber can kind of roam the halls of the event and interact with the attendees. But VTubers present this opportunity to have a guest on, and you can pay them a higher appearance fee, which the VTuber would love, and they get to attend virtually at home. They get to keep the anonymity, which is kind of for some, it is a very major thing in the VTubing community, is the fact that they are a VTuber is because they want to remain anonymous, or at least like anonymous to their real face and their real name. And so you can have these virtual influencers attend your event, and you don't have to pay the, whatever the hundreds or thousands to get them there. And what they bring with them is a very dedicated audience with a very dedicated reach. Their spend at events, especially for VTubers, is immense, especially if it's tied into conferences that are related to gaming, anime, or pop culture more broadly. In the same way that influencers and influencer events like VidCon have popped up and absolutely flourished in the last decade, VTubers have taken it to a next level where you have conventions which are geared towards not even like archetypes or I guess subcultures that VTubers usually exist in, but fans will instantly sell out tickets because their favorite VTuber is attending. That is the kind of pool that they bring. And what they bring also is a very dedicated spend. So that's my kind of marketing hat on for events that like kind of VTubers attend and why VTubers should attend events. But they also have physical presence at events. You can invite VTubers physically, and some do. And the kind of potential that you have with VTubers at events when they attend physically is interesting, because when you're virtual, you are relying on a little bit of networking issues in terms of like your internet connection. So that can kind of limit things like potential 3D performances. You can still run like things like meet and greets, signing sessions, panels, workshops, discussions, all those kinds of things. Those can all be done virtually. I mean, we're having a virtual interview right now, and we are probably, 15,000 kilometers away from each other, right? And it could be no different to just beaming this up in a convention center. When you invite them in person, you open up the opportunity for like 3D mocap performances, which has been done before. There is, sellout concerts in Japan and in the West now with things like HoloLive Connect the World. And that's kind of the opportunity that you have when inviting a VTuber in person, as well as, the networking kind of stuff that in-person con attendance and event attendance can't kind of put a price on, is when you can actually meet someone in the flesh and talk shop is a bit different. But there are insane benefits to having VTubers physically at events as well as virtually at events that kind of have different pros and different cons, but all I see is a lot more upside, especially if this is a market that you are interested in tapping into.
Right. Because I'm thinking back to some of the more corporate events. That's my general world. And I'm always looking for ways that I can go to a corporation or go to the trade show exhibitors that we're working with and go, here's a way for you to capture some attention from people. And like, they don't want to, what's funny is a lot of the sales reps, they don't want to appear on camera. They have no problem being in person, but they don't want to appear on camera. They don't want to talk on camera.
And this is a perfect solution to that. Like, you could have a corporate identity and a corporate spokesperson, and they could be comfortable, if they're comfortable speaking, at least speaking to camera or speaking to a piece, they can have this look that, is aligned with your brand identity and, aligned with your goals in marketing. And you can bring them to trade shows. Like, I've spoken a lot about anime, gaming, pop culture conventions, because those are the spaces that I typically have existed in. But I have also done panels based on gaming and esports and pop culture to businesses and to trade shows. And I have liaised with companies who are interested in the space, but don't necessarily have a product in the space, to kind of engage a different audience. And you could take these to any myriad of trade show, as long as if you have a mascot identity and you have a marketing strategy that kind of taps into the demographics that a VTuber could work in, or even like you just want a spokesperson that, you can kind of control in terms of the visual identity and aligning with the brand identity. VTubers are a great way of doing that. And the applications for that extend well beyond gaming, anime, and pop culture. They extend into the broader digital technology space. They engage basically every single industry could have a VTuber, in the same way that, we were speaking about AirAsia having a VTuber company. Well, like, you can have it with airlines and stuff, where anywhere that you kind of traditionally had a mascot or used a mascot to kind of promote your product, you can have a VTuber do it. But they can also fulfill multiple different other roles in your communication strategy, especially at trade shows and things like that.
Something that just occurred to me too around the VTuber role, and especially in the corporate world, is I'm thinking about companies that used to use spokespeople, right?
Yes.
So companies would, I'm thinking like, I forget the cereal company name. I want to say it was like Weetabix or something. Don't quote me on that. But they would get, like famous runners. I mean, like, okay.
Yeah, like Weet-Bix in like Australia, like
yes.
it's like constantly like branded with athletes because it is like, and there will be like speakers to that. And yeah, if I can pick up what you're kind of putting down,
yeah,
is you can have a VTuber who is both an influencer for the product that you have, and also a spokesperson for the product that you have. They can kind of fulfill both roles depending on what you need. Where someone like Aura, if we're going to bring it back to Opera GX, while she hasn't debuted yet, and a debut in the VTuber space is streamed, and like made content that is like more broadly appealing, or like more broad video content versus just social media posts. That's kind of the context of a debut. She still is like, there and a visual identity that Aura GX can align. And they would have statistics that could say probably like, yeah, because of Aura, we've had X amount of downloads of our browser. And she is both kind of in the realm of influencer, where, she's just generally an influencer, and also could be a brand spokesperson. And a better example of that as well is Hime for Crunchyroll, where, Hime streams watch parties of shows that are currently airing on Crunchyroll. And so, in the same way that if you're a streaming service or a video platform and you want to share your new content, you can bring an influencer along who is already tied to your brand identity and do the watch party with them, and both promote the influencer and your brand at the same time, in this kind of paradoxical spiral, which is very beneficial.
Not just that, but unlike a spokesperson, the brand still retains control over that VTuber entity, even if, say, the person behind it, the player, departs, correct?
Yeah. So this is an interesting one in the VTuber space, because in what we call this in VTubing is when a person retires an avatar and they no longer stream under their avatar, it is called a graduation. It comes from Japanese idol culture when a singer departs an idol group and they are graduated. They move on to a new life. And in VTubing, it is kind of a one and done thing. There are very few VTubers, at least in the traditional sense, which are recasted. And they get a new person to fill the character because people see it as a little bit disingenuous. People don't like it. It creates a divide in the fan base where it's like, oh, I liked the old one more. And that is a risk if you take up this medium and you have to recast and say, like, your comms person leaves or your spokesperson leaves, and you have to get a new voice for the VTuber, and you kind of have to be like, oh, we have to get a similar enough voice, or we have to get a voice that matches the model. While a lot of companies are progressive, a lot of I guess consumers are progressive, it does help that if you are a male presenting model, to have a voice that people are expecting to hear out of a male presenting model. Even though like it is a wonderful tool for gender diverse people, I can understand from a brand sense, those are the kinds of considerations that you have to line up. It is doable. I haven't seen it done in the brand VTuber space yet, but it is like a thing where if you have a spokesperson leave, you don't have to retire the look of that spokesperson. You can have them around. You can still use them as a mascot until you find a new voice, and then you can then bring them out again, and they can have, the same name, they can have the same identity, just with a different voice.
Right. Okay, cool. My brain is spinning with all sorts of different possibilities now. So I'm just trying to recenter my brain here.
This is the cool thing, right? Because VTubing as a marketing op is not something that people have talked about a lot, especially publicly. Right. So I come at this with a comms background. Obviously, I'm a journalist, but I study communications and I work in communications more broadly. So I can see all different facets of it, and there is the the side of VTubers, which is very much just like what your kids are watching on YouTube, right? But there is the untapped potential of VTubers where they are used as mascots, where they are used as spokespeople, where they are used as brand presences at events, and they are used as promotional material. And there is an audience there that if you find the right audience, their spend is very high, their engagement is very high, and their dedication and loyalty is very high.
Right. And so you build up, I feel like, okay, so here's what just went through my head as you were talking about all that is VTubers also feel like they could be a beautiful focal point for building a community around.
Yes, 100%. They are, if you are a brand who wants to foster, like if you have those community driven values in your communications plans and you want to create that kind of audience, a VTuber or like broadly influencers are a great way to do that. Especially if they're like genuine influencers, like they're aligned with the brand more so than just a celebrity spokesperson. And a VTuber is a further extension of that.
Right. So VTuber, so you could have a VTuber that is kind of the center of your community that you can that bridge, because I feel like the community driven stuff is what keeps momentum going between events, right? So
Yes.
we used to do like conventions and trade shows like once a year, and we'd get excited for it like 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. But now we're seeing like the hype build up weeks, months in advance, and we have like meetups on Discord, meetups in Second Life, meetups in VR chat, you know, just stuff that keeps and you know, your average VTuber streamer, like they're going live twice, 3, 4, 5 times a week sometimes.
Yeah, like your full-time VTuber, as like a dedicated content creator, not aligned with a brand, they're going live probably at minimum 5 times a week. Some go live upwards of 10 times a week, where they'll be streaming twice a day, and they'll stream on different platforms. So they'll do like a YouTube stream in the morning and then a Twitch stream in the afternoon, because that's where their audiences are. Like, you know, they've got more people on Twitch in the afternoon than they do in the morning. So they stream on one platform for one demographic and then another platform for another demographic.
Right.
Brand VTubers that I've noticed, they stream a little bit less frequently, but they are also part of other communication and marketing opportunities. So a brand VTuber, kind of like Hime is kind of the best example. She streams, like when I've been paying attention, is like 3 times a week, 3, 4 times a week. And a lot of those are aligned with the kind of communication principles that Crunchyroll as a company wants to develop.
Right. So it's perfect alignment then.
Yeah.
Right. Makes sense. Because that's one thing that I find the VTubers have over a lot of brands is they have community that most brands can only dream of.
Yes.
You know, they have Discord servers, they have the YouTube channels, they have their Twitch channels, they are fought. And what is the core behind VTubers just nailing community so well, in your opinion?
It's the same core that kind of nailed influencers really well in terms of community and broader YouTube entertainers, Twitch entertainers, streamers, vloggers, etc. is they have an air of relatability. They, like, you know, it is just like there is still the kind of perception that it can just be a dude with a camera, and that dude could be me, right? That is one area of the community. But the other aspect of it is it taps into pop culture in a relatable fashion. So you could like a specific game. There's a VTuber who streams a specific game. You're going to go watch them, right? Or they like the same kind of stuff that you like. And it's just like the same kind of relationship that you would have hanging out with your friends, whether that be in person or online. VTubers can kind of bring that kind of community while also adding on a visual element where people can just join the community because they really like the design. Right? They could just really align and just be like, you know what? Let's pull one out, because I'm thinking of her right now. Solan Tatsuki, who is a member of Niji Sanji, which is one of the biggest VTuber agencies in the world. You know, you could just really fall in love with this half humanoid, half purple dragon identity. And you know, you go watch her stream and she's cackling, like laughing with just this absolute hysteria. And she's also really good at games. right? So like you could just align with any one of those things, whether it be the visual identity, the way that she communicates through her content, or the content itself, like what is she actually streaming, which is like Apex Legends or competitive games, or some more casual games as well. You can kind of pick up on any one of those things and feel attached and build a community around that. So because there's more entry points to the community, that's why the community aspect does really well.
Right. More entry points to community, low barrier of entry to the community, and relatability.
Yeah.
Those sound like amazing keys to keep in mind, pretty much not just for VTubing, but for any kind of brand. Yeah.
Like as I've mentioned at the top, and I've tried to keep out the whole way through, VTubers are just an extension of a communication strategy for a company. If you're looking at it from a purely industry and brand side of things, is they are not going to be a silver bullet, and they tie into a broader plan, but they can tie in really well to a broader plan if you utilize them correctly and look at those major parameters and look at your demographics to use them in that way.
Right. Makes sense. We're starting to run a bit short on time, so I want to ask one final question here, which is, I'm a company, I'm a brand, I'm now thinking VTubing sounds like it would be something that's beneficial for our brand, something that would help build community. Where do I start?
I would start where we kind of looped around at the start of this conversation, is you want to start with a mascot and a brand identity. So before you even get to the VTuber stage, you need to sketch out, what is our marketing strategy? What are the demographics we are targeting? What are the kind of industries that we are wanting to push into? And what are the voices that we are going to use to do that? When you have that all sketched out, you can then go, all right, we have these kind of elements that overlap with these subcultures online, or we want to tap into these subcultures online with our products. VTubers also have an overlap in these subcultures, or VTubers can be a useful communication medium for this because, you know, they are relatable, they are community centric, they are a little bit more dynamic, and they are spokespeople or influencers. And we want someone to vouch for our product in that way. You kind of have to consider, if you are a brand who wants to use a VTuber effectively, they have to just be an effective part of your existing or new communication strategy and marketing strategy, and not just a tacky add-on at the end where they stream a couple of times like Tony the Tiger and then they vanish into thin air as novelty.
Right.
You know, when we're talking about businesses and marketing strategies, like, you will dump tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of your company, into marketing each year. Millions in the very biggest of corporations, right? A VTuber model can be a one-time setup fee of, you know, my model for full transparency cost me just shy of $1,000 USD, from everything from design concept to art to the rigging that you're seeing me move around in. And this is what would be on the more budget end. But you can get, you know, the models that you're seeing from brand VTubers, they would cost closer to kind of $10,000 USD. So those are the kinds of, that's the kind of monetary value that we're dealing with here. If you can justify that in your comms plan, and you can see a VTuber giving you an ROI on that, then there's no reason why you can't experiment in the same way that people have experimented with social media platforms in the past and trying to push engagement strategies there. And ultimately, it's okay to fail. If a VTuber is not tapping into the audience that you want, or it's not, you know, driving the engagement that you want, or you can't find a way to make it work with your brand identity, it's okay to just be like, you know what, this failed, and we can move on with a new strategy in the next financial year. That is a totally acceptable thing to do. There's obviously some sensitivities in the VTubing space around that, in terms of if you wanted to actually interact in the VTubing space, there is kind of the whole send-off that you have to do. But from a business standpoint, and if you're just using them as like at a trade show or a brand spokesperson, or kind of as like a mascot that with a little bit more interactiveness, you can very much just go, you know what, this hasn't worked for us, and we can try again later, but we can shelve it for now. There's so many different ways to tackle it, but you kind of just need to work it and into your existing comms plan or your new comms plan and your new marketing strategy to see if a brand VTuber will work for you.
Right. And for full transparency too, like, a lot of people, I think, will look at what we're doing and go, oh my goodness, I need a motion capture setup and VR, and you don't need any of that, right?
No, I am currently sitting at my computer, just at my regular desktop, and it's not like a top spec desktop at all. It's like 3 years old now. and would be slightly more powerful than a computer that you would have at the office, right? And the only thing that I'm using to to do my motion capture is a Logitech webcam. That's the only thing that is attached to my computer. I'm obviously booted up into a special program called VTube Studio, which kind of is moving me around and like kind of capturing my art, which is rigged in a specific way, and then translating my movements on the camera. So I'm swinging left and right now as to my model swinging left and right. But it is at its core, it doesn't have to be high spec and high tech. If it is, like, you can just do it with a webcam, and a lot of people just do with just a webcam. The 3D stuff is a little bit more of an investment, but there is also easy entry points into 3D with things like the Sony Milky product, which retails for about $450, which is like an absolute godsend for 3D capture, and affordable 3D capture versus, you know, spending tens of thousands of dollars on individual mocap suits.
Right. Yeah, that I keep forgetting about that Sony product. Like the setup that I'm using, just for everybody that's watching, again, I'm just like Ducky here. I'm using a webcam. I'm using webcam to do a little bit of hand tracking as well.
I can't raise my arms, sadly. Yeah, so my arms are firmly by my side, and I can only stay in this one spot unless I drag my model around on the screen. But there are ways that, you know, if you're a VTuber and you want to be able to move your hands, you know, there is the 3D option, or there are toggles that you can make where you just hit a button and your arm will raise, or like, you know, you can have them set in a position and you can kind of move them around in that way. So there is a multitude of ways that you can kind of make it VTubing your own, and there's a multitude of entry points. You can just start with someone that looks like me, right? And, you know, it is just a talking head kind of thing, which is ultimately, like, you know, no different from what spokespersons have been in the past, right? But it is, you can start at this point, and if it works, you can then go, all right, cool, we'll go for the update, we'll put a little bit more money into the design, and we'll give it these new capabilities. So the world's really your oyster.
And here's the thing: if you're a company that's going to be building out a studio anyway, and I'm a firm believer that in 2024 and beyond, if you want to tap into where events are going, you need to be building a studio. Like you go to a trade show as a corporation, you could be in for 5 to 6 figures. That kind of money, you can build a nice studio. And to do VTubing on top of that, once you have all that hardware, is dead simple. You just need the model at that point.
Yeah, all you need is the model and the person to do it. And, you know, if it's just someone that you has some common, or, you know, someone does it as like as a project on the side as part of their regular duty, right? But once you have the initial investment of, well, we have all of this gear, but we're not using it 95% of the time, you can find a way to get a bit more out of that investment through these avenues. And honestly, we've spoken a lot about VTubers, but honestly, it more broadly extends to a different audience. You don't have to be a VTuber, or you don't have to be a company VTuber to use that equipment. You can just be a regular influencer. And it's just trying to find the ways to use the equipment that would otherwise sit in your office, except for when you're doing, you know, quarterly board meetings or annual reports, right? And on all those kind of calls. Or various videography things for promotion. You can have it and you can use it on a more consistent basis if you tap into this different market, and if you tap into these different subcultures.
Right. Ducky, where can people find more about you? If they want to get in touch, they want to connect with you, where do they find you?
Yeah, so full name for everyone listening, because wasn't at the top, Andrew Amos is my full name. So if you look that up, AMOS, you can find me, usually with a pretty simple Google search. My stuff usually comes up. I'm most accessible on Twitter. So you can follow me on Twitter at DVCKYVT. So that's Ducky with a V and then VT at the end for VTuber. There you'll be able to keep up with my content, which is very much heavily focused on the VTubing space. From all angles. So if you're interested in the kind of subcultures that VTubers interact in, I interview a lot of VTubers and talk about their growth in the space and kind of the spaces they take up in the space. I also do a lot of work that kind of covers the more agency and brand side of VTubing and kind of seeing where VTubers are being taken up in a more corporate space as well. And I have some work coming out there, so you can keep an eye on that. But that's where you'll find me most of the time. And my contact details are all on my Twitter as well, if you do want to reach out.
All right, awesome. We'll make sure to have links to all your spaces in the video description below. So, Ducky, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed chatting shop about VTubers, and hopefully, you know, this has opened some eyes for some people into a different subculture that you may not have realized. So I hope this has been helpful.
Well, thank you so much. And to you, the viewer, thank you so much for watching. If you found this content helpful, obviously like, subscribe, go check out Ducky's links in the description below. And I'll talk to you again another time. Take care.